At my son's lavish wedding, the son I raised alone, his bride pointed at me in front of 400 guests and sneered, "This worthless old man is ruining our elegant celebration. Get out!" The room froze in shock. I calmly smiled, stood up, and revealed the truth that shattered their perfect world. They dropped to their knees, begging for mercy. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harper. I'm 64 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. For the past 15 years, I've been working as a gardener, tending to the estates of wealthy clients across the city. Simple work, honest work, the kind that gets soil under your fingernails and teaches you patience. Most people see me as just another landscaper with calloused hands and dirt on my boots. They're not entirely wrong. I raised my son Brandon alone. His mother left when he was 5, packed her bags one Tuesday morning, and never looked back. So, it was just the two of us. I worked 3 jobs, some years to put him through school, weekends at the hardware store, evenings cleaning office buildings, days doing whatever landscaping gig I could find. Brandon got his business degree from UT Austin, graduated with honors. I was so proud I could barely speak at his graduation. But people change, or maybe they just reveal who they always were. Brandon works in marketing now, pulls in a decent salary at some company called King Industries. He's 32, wears expensive suits, drives a car that costs more than I made in 2 years of backbreaking work. We used to have Sunday dinners together, my small kitchen, his favorite pot roast, talking about everything and nothing. Those dinners stopped about 6 months ago. "Too busy," he said. "Work stuff." I understood, or I tried to. Then he met Jessica King. The first time Brandon mentioned her, his voice changed. Got this excited, almost desperate edge to it. She's amazing. Dad, her family owns King Industries, where I work. Her father's the vice president. She's everything. I should have heard the warning bells then, should have recognized that tone, but I was just happy my son sounded happy. The day everything started unraveling was a Monday in early February. Brandon called, asked if he could bring Jessica and her parents over for a family dinner. "They want to meet you," he said. "It's important." I spent 2 days preparing, cleaned my modest 2-bedroom house on Willow Creek Drive until it gleamed, cooked my best recipes, even brought out my bonsai collection from the back porch to the living room. 23 miniature trees. Some I'd been cultivating for over 15 years. They were my pride and joy, each one shaped with patience and care. When they arrived, I knew within 30 seconds that I'd made a terrible mistake displaying those trees. Jessica stepped through my door like she was entering a contaminated zone. She was 29, blonde, beautiful in that cold, polished way that comes from money and makeup tutorials. Her Instagram bio probably said something about luxury lifestyle and elevated living. She wore a white dress that probably costs more than my monthly mortgage and shoes. So impractical they clicked on my hardwood floors like little hammers of judgment. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she surveyed my living room. "How quaint." Behind her came Richard and Patricia King. Richard was 58, silver-haired, wearing a suit that screamed wealth. Patricia looked like she just stepped out of a country club magazine, all pearls and practiced smiles that never reached her eyes. "Brandon, darling," Patricia said, not even acknowledging me. "Is this where you grew up?" She said it the way someone might ask if you grew up in a cardboard box. My son actually looked embarrassed. His face flushed red as he avoided my eyes. "Yeah, Mom. Mrs. King, this is home." I extended my hand to Richard. "Mr. King, pleasure to meet you. I'm Ali." He shook it with the enthusiasm of someone touching a dead fish. Richard King, Vice President and COO of King Industries, as if I'd asked for his resume. Please sit. I gestured to my dining table. I'd set it carefully. Nothing fancy, but clean and welcoming. Dinner's almost ready. Jessica's eyes landed on my bonsai collection. What are these little trees? Are they dying? They're bonsai, I explained, trying to keep my voice warm. Japanese miniature trees. I've been growing them for years. That one there, I pointed to a small maple with brilliant red leaves, is 18 years old, started from a seed. How peculiar, Patricia said, the word leaving her mouth like something sour. Growing stunted trees on purpose. I suppose everyone needs a hobby. The dinner was worse. I served pot roast, homemade rolls, roasted vegetables, comfort food, the kind Brandon used to devour. Jessica picked at her plate like I'd served her roadkill. So, Allie, Richard said, cutting into his meat with surgical precision, Brandon tells us you're in landscaping, gardening mostly. I take care of several estates around Austin. Keeps me busy. That's all he said, just like I'd confirmed I collected trash for a living. Jessica leaned toward Brandon, but spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Babe, after we're married, we really should get you a better suit for family events. Something more appropriate for our circle. Brandon nodded eagerly. Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you think. I watched my son transform before my eyes. The boy who used to help me plant vegetables in our tiny backyard, who'd come home covered in mud and grinning. He was disappearing, replaced by this nervous, approval-seeking stranger. The wedding is going to be spectacular, Patricia announced. We've booked the Commodore Perry Estate. 400 guests, a reputation to uphold. After dinner, reputation to uphold. After dinner, I was clearing plates when I heard them in the living room. I'd stepped into the kitchen, but the walls in my house are thin. Jessica's voice carried clearly. Brandon, we need to talk about your father. I froze, my hands still gripping a stack of dishes. What about him? Brandon sounded defensive, but weak, like he already knew where this was going. Look, I don't want to be cruel, but we need to minimize his presence at the wedding. Can you imagine what our friends will think? A gardener in cheap clothes talking about his little trees. It's embarrassing. Jess, he's my father. He raised me alone. I can't just, I'm not saying don't invite him. She cut him off sharply. I'm saying keep him in the background. Way in the background. Seat him somewhere far from the important guests. And please, please tell him not to mention his job or those bizarre bonsai things. Silence. Long, terrible silence. Okay, Brandon finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I'll talk to him, Patricia added helpfully. Some people just don't understand their place. Dear, it's not his fault. He's simple. But this is your special day. I stood in my kitchen holding those plates so hard I'm surprised they didn't crack. Something inside me, something I'd built over decades of hard work and sacrifice, cracked instead. They left 20 minutes later. Jessica didn't even say goodbye to me. Just air kiss near Brandon's cheek and swept out. Richard gave me a curt nod. Patricia smiled that venomous smile. Brandon lingered at the door. Dad, it's fine, I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. Get home safe, son. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He never did anymore. After they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by my bonsai trees. These trees that Jessica called peculiar and stunted. Each one represented years of careful attention. patience, understanding that true value takes time to cultivate and requires vision to appreciate. I'd raised my son the same way, carefully, patiently, with love. And now he was ashamed of me. The betrayal hit me then, really hit me. Not loud or dramatic, just a cold, spreading numbness. For the first time in many years, I felt truly alone in my own house. I walked to my bedroom, opened my closet, and reached behind the winter coats I rarely needed in Texas. My fingers found the small fireproof safe I kept there. Inside were documents most people would never guess a simple gardener possessed. But I wasn't just a gardener, and my son was about to learn what happens when you trade respect for status, love for money, and family for social climbing. I looked at those papers and thought, if Brandon wants to choose wealth over his father, let him. But first, let him learn exactly what wealth really means. The weeks that followed felt like watching a slow-motion car crash, where I was both observer and victim. Brandon stopped calling. Our Sunday dinners, the tradition we'd maintained even through his busiest years at college, vanished like they'd never existed. When I tried reaching out, his text came back short and dismissive. Busy with wedding planning. Lots going on at work. I'll call you later. He never did. I kept working, Monday through Friday. I showed up at the estates of Austin's wealthy elite, pruning their roses and trimming their hedges. The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked for people exactly like the kings, making their homes beautiful while they barely noticed my existence. But I noticed everything. Always had. I started remembering Brandon as a boy, not the distant cold man he'd become, but the child I'd raised. There was this one Saturday when he was 7. I'd been working a double shift at the hardware store, dead on my feet. Came home to find he'd made dinner, burnt grilled cheese sandwiches and canned soup. But he was so proud. I wanted to help. Dad, he'd said, those big, earnest eyes looking up at me. You work so hard. That boy would have defended me against Jessica and her parents. That boy would have stood up and said, "Don't talk about my father that way." When did he disappear? When did my son become this hollow version of himself? I knew the answer. It started in college, watching his classmates with their fancy cars and family money accelerated when he got the job at King Industries, surrounded by people who measured worth in dollar signs and social connections. And it crystallized completely when he met Jessica, a woman who could open doors he desperately wanted opened. I wasn't angry, not yet. Mostly, I felt sad, disappointed, like I'd poured myself into raising this boy, sacrificing everything, and somehow produced someone who valued things I'd never taught him to care about. 3 weeks after that disastrous dinner, Brandon showed up at my house unannounced. It was late March, a warm afternoon. I was in my backyard working on a particularly stubborn juniper bonsai. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice tight with nervous energy. "Brandon." I didn't look up from my work. "This is a surprise." "Yeah, we need to talk about the wedding." I figured. I carefully wired a small branch, shaping it just so. "Go ahead." He shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. "Look, I know you're planning to come, and that's great, but Jessica has some requests about how you, present yourself." I finally looked up at him, really looked. My son stood there in his expensive shoes, wringing his hands like a guilty child. But his eyes were hard, determined. "What requests?" I asked calmly. "Just, could you maybe dress simply? Nothing too flashy. And when people ask what you do, maybe just say you're retired. Don't mention the gardening thing." Jessica thinks it might seem he trailed off. "Seem what?" "Brandon, Look, these are important people. Business contacts, social connections. This wedding is about making the right impression. Something in his phrasing caught me. Making the right impression for who? For us. For me and Jessica. For our future. He said it like I was being deliberately obtuse. And where exactly will I be sitting at this wedding? Brandon's face flushed. There's a table in the back near the kitchen. You'll be with some of Jessica's distant relatives. The back near the kitchen. I let those words hang in the air between us. Dad, it's just... Are you ashamed of me, son? The question stopped him cold. I watched emotions flicker across his face. Guilt, defensiveness, anger, more guilt, but no denial. That's what killed me. No immediate, horrified denial. It's complicated, he finally said. No, I said quietly. It's actually very simple. Either you're ashamed of your father, or you're not. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Jessica's family. They have expectations. This wedding is costing over $300,000. Her father's connections could make my career. I raised you alone, I interrupted, my voice still calm, but harder now. I worked 3 jobs, so you could go to college. I ate ramen for dinner, so you could have real meals. I skipped buying myself clothes for years, so you could have what you needed. And now you're asking me to pretend I'm something I'm not, so your fiancé's family won't be embarrassed. Dad, please, just this once, just for one day. I looked at my son, really looked, and saw a stranger, someone who'd traded everything I'd taught him about integrity and self-respect for a chance at belonging to a world that would never truly accept him anyway. I'll attend your wedding, Brandon, I said finally. I'm your father. I'll be there. But I won't hide in the back, and I won't lie about who I am. His face hardened. Fine. Just try not to embarrass me, okay? After he left, I sat in my garden for hours. The sun set. The temperature dropped. I stayed there, surrounded by my bonsai trees, thinking about choices and consequences. That night, I pulled out the documents again, looked at them with new eyes. I'd built something over the past decades, built it carefully, quietly, with the same patience I used to shape these trees. Most people saw the gardener. They never looked deeper, never thought to ask why a simple landscaper lived so modestly, or why he seemed so unbothered by money, or why wealthy clients specifically requested him year after year. Brandon didn't know. Jessica and her parents certainly didn't know. They'd looked at my small house, my working man's clothes, my dirt-stained hands, and made their judgments. Decided they knew exactly who and what I was. They were wrong. I thought about those bonsai trees. 18 years to grow that maple from a seed. 18 years of careful attention, precise cuts, patient shaping. Most people looked at them and saw stunted, peculiar little trees. They didn't understand that bonsai isn't about limitation. It's about revealing essential nature, about showing what's possible when you have vision and commitment. I'd spent 30 years raising my son with that same philosophy, trying to help him grow into his best self. But unlike my trees, he'd chosen a different path, chosen to be shaped by people who valued only surface beauty and social status. Fine, let him make that choice. But choices have consequences, and if my son wanted to marry into a family that measured worth in dollars and connections, he should probably know the full picture of what those measurements really meant. I made my decision that night. Not revenge. I'm not a vengeful man. But truth. Justice. A lesson about looking deeper. About real value versus surface appearances. If Brandon wanted to choose money and status over his father, he'd learn what those things actually cost. And more importantly, who truly held the power he was so desperately trying to access. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first to my attorney, David Turner, the second to Gerald Martinez, my CEO. Both men I'd worked with for over a decade. Both men who understood what was about to happen. "It's time," I told them. "Prepare everything." When I hung up, I felt calm for the first time in weeks, clear-headed. My son wanted to play in a world of wealth and power, wanted to impress people who judged worth by bank accounts and business connections. Well, then, let's show him what real power looks like. The wedding was 3 months away. 3 months for Brandon to continue down his chosen path, to cement his decisions, to prove whether any part of the boy I raised still existed inside the man he'd become. I looked at my bonsai maple, its branches perfectly shaped after 18 years of patient work, and smiled. Some lessons take time to cultivate, but the most important ones, those are worth the wait. The investigation began quietly, the way most important things in my life had always begun, with patience and attention to detail. I met David Turner, my attorney, at Mozart's Coffee Roasters on a Tuesday morning in early April. David was 47, sharp as a tack, with the kind of mind that could find loopholes in concrete. We'd worked together for over a decade on various matters, and he knew better than to ask unnecessary questions. "King Industries," I said, sliding a folder across the small table. "I need everything. Financial health, contracts, debts, stakeholder information, everything that's public record and everything that's findable." David glanced at the folder, then at me. "This is your son's fiancé's family company." "It is." He nodded slowly. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "How deep do you want me to dig to bedrock?" It took him 2 weeks. When he called me back, his voice carried that particular tone lawyers get when they found something explosive. "Ali, you need to see this in person." We met again at the same coffee shop. David laid out documents like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "King Industries is drowning," he said quietly. 47 million in debt. They've lost 3 major contracts in the past 18 months. Richard King has been scrambling to find investors, but word's gotten around that the company's mismanaged. Nobody's biting. I studied the numbers, saw the desperation in the quarterly reports, the creative accounting trying to hide the bleeding. There's more. David continued. "Remember those investment funds you set up 8 years ago? The diversified portfolio through the offshore trusts. Of course, you own 35% of King Industries. You bought in when they were doing well before Richard started making bad decisions. You're their largest single shareholder." I sat back in my chair, letting that sink in. The irony was almost poetic. Does Richard King know? The shares are held through 3 different investment vehicles, all with different names, unless he digs very deep. And I mean forensic accounting deep. He'd never connect them to you. I smiled. Not the warm smile of a father watching his son graduate. The other kind. The cold one. "Keep monitoring them," I said. "I want weekly updates until the wedding. And David, prepare documentation of my full position, corporate structure, asset holdings, everything. Make it airtight and make it presentable. Planning something specific? Just being prepared." The following week, Brandon left his phone on my kitchen counter when he used the bathroom. I wasn't the type to snoop through my son's private messages, except I was washing dishes and the screen lit up with a notification from Jessica. "Make sure your pathetic father sits somewhere in the back. He's ruining the whole aesthetic of our wedding." I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I picked up the phone and took a screenshot, sent it to myself, deleted the evidence of the send. When Brandon came back, I handed him the phone without a word. 2 weeks before the wedding, Brandon showed up at my door unannounced. It was a late Saturday afternoon, and I was working on my juniper bonsai, carefully wiring a new branch into position. "Dad, we need to talk." The tone was different this time, more nervous, almost pleading. I set down my tools. "Come in." He sat at my kitchen table, his expensive watch catching the light. I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Jessica's been thinking." He started about the wedding, and she's worried that having too many people there might make it feel crowded. 400 guests sounds pretty crowded already. I observed. Right. But look, what she's saying is, maybe it would be better if you didn't come. I mean, I could send you pictures, and we could do a family dinner later. Just the three of us. No. He blinked. "What?" I said. "No. Brandon, I'm coming to your wedding. I'm your father. I raised you alone. I'll be there." His face flushed. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making anything hard," I said calmly. "I'm simply attending my son's wedding. That's what fathers do." He stood up, agitated. Fine. Just be inconspicuous, okay? Sit where they put you. Don't talk too much. And for the love of, he caught himself, just don't embarrass me." After he left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Gerald Martinez. "My CEO, Gerald, I need the full corporate presentation package, annual reports, client lists, revenue documentation, everything that proves Harper Tech's position in the industry. And I need it ready to display on short notice. Are we pitching to someone? Something like that. Can you also pull together the documentation showing our stake in King Industries? I want it clear, simple, impossible to misunderstand." There was a pause. "Ali, what are you planning?" "Justice." "Gerald." "Justice." The second call was to David. "The wedding's in 2 weeks. I need you on standby. Things are going to get interesting, and I may need legal counsel immediately afterward." "You're really doing this?" "Brandon made his choice," I said. "Now he gets to live with it. So does his new family." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing, not frantically. I've never been a frantic person. Methodically. I arranged for the venue's AV technician to have a wireless presentation system ready. Told him I might want to show some family photos during the reception. Paid him $300 for the accommodation. He was happy to help. I bought a new suit. Nothing flashy, but well made. Dignified. The kind of suit a man wears when he knows exactly who he is. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my garden with my bonsai trees, touching the maple I'd grown from a seed 18 years ago. Its branches were perfect now, shaped with patience and vision. Brandon had been shaped, too. I realized. But not by me. Not in the end. He'd allowed Jessica and her family to reshape him into something I barely recognized. Tomorrow he would learn what happened when you traded authenticity for acceptance, dignity for status. Tomorrow the world would see what I'd built, while everyone assumed I was just a simple gardener with dirt under his fingernails. Tomorrow, justice. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding felt like watching a storm build on the horizon. You know it's coming. You know it'll be massive, but all you can do is prepare and wait. I continued my regular gardening work, Monday through Friday. I showed up at the estates, pruned the roses, shaped the hedges, made pleasant small talk with clients who saw me as part of the landscape. The irony of tending gardens for people who'd probably treat me exactly like the kings did wasn't lost on me. But every evening, I reviewed the documents David and Gerald had prepared: financial statements, corporate structures, shareholder agreements. I memorized every number, every detail. When the moment came, I wanted to be absolutely certain. Brandon called twice during those 3 weeks. Both conversations were brief, awkward. He was checking if I was still planning to attend. I assured him I was. Both times, I heard Jessica's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Both times, Brandon's voice got smaller, more apologetic. Just remember, Dad, low profile. Please, I'll be myself. I told him. That's all I've ever been. 3 days before the wedding, I got a visitor I didn't expect. Patricia King showed up at my house in a Mercedes that probably cost more than I earned in 2 years of gardening. She was dressed like she was headed to a charity luncheon, all coordinated pastels and calculated elegance. Mr. Harper, she said when I opened the door. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in the neighborhood. Nobody is ever in the neighborhood of my modest street unless they have specific business there. Mrs. King, what can I do for you? She smiled that practice smile. I wanted to personally deliver your table assignment for the wedding and perhaps discuss some expectations. I invited her in, more out of curiosity than courtesy. She perched on my sofa like a bird afraid of catching something. You have a very humble home, she observed. It suits me. She pulled out a small card from her purse. You'll be at table 23. It's near the kitchen entrance, which is actually quite convenient if you need anything. Some of Brandon's distant cousins will be there. Table 23, the back corner, the place you put people you're obligated to invite, but hope nobody notices. I understand. I said simply. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Harper, I'm going to be direct. This wedding is very important to our family. We've invested a great deal emotionally and financially. Jessica is our only daughter. We want her day to be perfect. I want Brandon's day to be memorable, too. Yes. Well, she straightened. I'm sure you understand that certain disparities in background can create awkward situations. We're not asking you to be someone you're not. We're simply asking for discretion. Discretion? I repeated. Yes. Perhaps it would be best if you arrived quietly, stayed at your assigned table, and left after the meal, before the dancing and the more social parts of the evening. I looked at this woman who'd sat in my kitchen and made snide comments about my bonsai trees, who'd raised a daughter who thought kindness was weakness and money was character. And I smiled. Mrs. King, I appreciate you coming all this way to give me these instructions, but I'm going to attend my son's entire wedding. I'm going to stay for every moment, and I'm going to be exactly who I am. Her smile froze. I don't think you understand the kind of people who will be there. Oh, I understand perfectly. Don't worry. I won't embarrass anyone who doesn't deserve it. She left shortly after, her Mercedes purring away like an irritated cat. The night before the wedding, I laid out my new suit. Checked my phone. The presentation files were loaded and ready. I'd confirmed with the AV technician that everything would work seamlessly. I slept surprisingly well. No anxiety, no second thoughts. Just the calm that comes from knowing you're about to do something completely necessary. The wedding was on a Saturday. The Commodore Perry Estate was one of Austin's most prestigious venues. A historic mansion with manicured grounds and rooms that had hosted everyone from oil barons to politicians. The rental cost alone was $45,000, not counting the flowers, catering, band, photographer, and all the other elements of a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. I arrived exactly on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to cause a scene, just present. The estate was transformed, white flowers everywhere cascading from every surface, string quartets playing classical music, waiters in crisp uniforms carrying champagne on silver trays, 400 guests in designer clothes dripping with jewelry and self-importance. I was directed to table 23. As promised, it was in the back corner near the swinging kitchen doors. My table mates were people I'd never met, distant relatives of Brandon's mother's side, people who'd barely known my ex-wife and had zero connection to me or my son. They made polite conversation for about 5 minutes, then essentially forgot I existed. I watched Brandon at the altar. He looked nervous, tugging at his collar, glancing at Jessica like she was both his salvation and his judge. Jessica looked radiant in a dress that probably cost $40,000, smiling for the cameras, playing the perfect bride. Richard King sat in the front row, beaming with proprietary pride. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The ceremony was elegant, expensive, and utterly hollow. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I stayed silent. This wasn't the moment. The reception began. Dinner was served. Some kind of truffle infused something with microgreens and a sauce whose name I couldn't pronounce. At the head table, Brandon and Jessica held hands, smiled at guests, played their parts perfectly. I ate quietly, watching, waiting. During the meal, a few guests wandered past my table. One older gentleman, a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit, paused when he saw me. "Excuse me, but you look familiar. Have we met?" "I don't believe so," I said politely. You just have that face, the kind that suggests there's more to you than meets the eye." He moved on, but I noticed Jessica had seen the interaction, seen someone talking to me, treating me like a person rather than furniture. Her face tightened. She excused herself from the head table. I watched her make her way across the room, stopping at the bar for what must have been her third glass of champagne. Her cheeks were flushed, her movement slightly unsteady. Then she did something I'd been half expecting and half dreading. She grabbed the microphone from the band leader. The music stopped mid-note, leaving the ballroom in sudden, jarring silence. 400 conversations died instantly as every head turned toward Jessica, who stood center stage, microphone in hand, her face flushed with champagne and something darker, resentment that had been building all evening. "Excuse me, everyone." Her voice rang out across the room, too loud, aggressive. "I'm so sorry to interrupt this beautiful celebration, but there's something I need to address." I set down my fork carefully. My heart rate didn't increase. If anything, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The same feeling I got when I was about to make a critical business decision. Everything was about to change, and I was ready. Jessica's eyes locked onto me across the crowded room, even from this distance. I could see the venom in them. "We wanted tonight to be perfect, absolutely perfect, and it has been, hasn't it? The flowers, the music, the venue, everything we dreamed of." She gestured grandly around the room. "But there's been one small problem all evening, one little detail that's been bothering me. Oh, here we go. You see that man back there?" She pointed directly at me, her finger jabbing the air like an accusation, sitting in the back corner next to the kitchen. "That's Brandon's father." A ripple of uncomfortable murmuring spread through the crowd. I could see people craning their necks to look at me. I remained perfectly still, my face neutral. Now I know what you're thinking. That's nice. The father of the groom is here. Except Jessica's voice turned nasty, dropping the pretense of politeness. Just look at him. Really look. An old gardener in a cheap suit. And yes, I can tell it's cheap, sitting there like he belongs among us, among people who actually matter. The murmuring grew louder, but now it was tinged with shock. This wasn't wedding reception banter. This was something ugly. Brandon had gone pale. He'd half risen from his chair, his mouth open, but no words came out. He looked trapped between his bride and his father, frozen in the worst moment of his life. Jessica was on a roll now, emboldened by the champagne and her captive audience. Brandon and I wanted this day to be perfect, but some people— She looked directly at me again. Some people just don't understand what class means, what refinement means. They show up where they're not really wanted because they can't take a hint. Patricia King, I noticed, was nodding along, her face set in approval. Richard looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, did nothing to stop his daughter's public execution of a man who'd done nothing but exist in her line of sight. So, here's what I'm going to say in front of all our distinguished guests. Jessica continued, her voice rising. Mr. Harper, Allie, I think it's time you left. You've had your dinner. You've seen the ceremony. But honestly, you're ruining the aesthetic of our reception. This is a celebration of elegance, of success, of people who've actually accomplished something in life. And you sitting there in your discount rack suit with your dirt-stained hands. Jessica, maybe that's enough. Someone called from the crowd, but she waved them off. No, it's not enough. Brandon, tell your father. Tell him to leave. Tell him he doesn't belong here. 400 pairs of eyes swiveled to Brandon. My son sat frozen, his face a mask of horror and shame. But not shame for his bride's behavior. Shame for me, for my existence, for the embarrassment of having a father who didn't fit Jessica's Instagram perfect vision. The silence stretched out, terrible and revealing. Then Brandon looked down at his plate and said nothing. Patricia King stood up, her voice carrying across the room. Jessica, darling, don't upset yourself. Some people simply don't understand their place in society. It's not Mr. Harper's fault that he's limited in his understanding of proper etiquette. The ballroom had gone completely silent, except for the sound of uncomfortable shifting and whispered conversations. I could feel the weight of 400 judgments pressing down on me, assuming, deciding, dismissing. I'd been dismissed before. My whole life people had looked at my callous hands and modest clothes and made their assumptions. Usually, I let them. It was easier that way, more peaceful. But today was different. Today my son had chosen to say nothing, while his bride publicly humiliated the man who'd raised him alone, who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. Today, Brandon had shown me exactly who he'd become, and that meant it was time to show everyone exactly who I was. I stood up slowly. The movement drew every eye in the room. I could see Jessica's triumphant smirk, expecting me to slink away in shame. Could see Richard King's dismissive expression, Patricia's satisfied smile. Could see Brandon still staring at his plate, his face red, his whole body radiating the wish that I would just disappear and make this easier for him. Jessica, I said, my voice carrying clearly without the microphone. Decades of commanding boardrooms, rooms these people knew nothing about, had taught me how to project authority. Thank you for that illuminating speech. I think it's important that everyone here knows exactly how you feel. I walked toward the center of the room. People shifted in their seats, uncertain. The wedding planner looked panicked, probably wondering if she should call security. "You're absolutely right about one thing," I continued, moving with the calm confidence of a man who held all the cards. "I'm a gardener. I do have dirt under my fingernails most days. And yes, this suit came from Dillard's, not some boutique designer." Jessica's smirk widened. She thought I was agreeing with her, validating her cruelty. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, pulling out my phone. "See, you invited someone here today without actually knowing who they were inviting. That's understandable. You're young, and you're used to people being exactly what they appear to be on the surface." I gestured to the AV technician I'd spoken with weeks ago. He nodded, understanding immediately. A large screen descended from the ceiling, the same screen they'd planned to use for the wedding slideshow later. "Since we have this captive audience," I said, addressing the room now instead of Jessica, "let me properly introduce myself. My name is Oliver Harper. Most people call me Ali. And yes, I'm a gardener. It's my hobby, my passion. I find it meditative, working with growing things, shaping them with patience and care." I tapped my phone. The Harper Tech Solutions logo appeared on the screen, crisp and professional. I'm also the founder and majority owner of Harper Tech Solutions. We're a cybersecurity firm specializing in government contracts and corporate security infrastructure. Perhaps some of you have heard of us. We provide security for the Pentagon, the NSA, and about 340 private corporations across the country. The room went dead silent. I could see comprehension dawning on some faces, disbelief on others. Jessica's smirk had frozen, starting to crack at the edges. The company's current valuation is $340 million, give or take. I let that number sink in while I advanced to the next slide. Our client list, impressive and verifiable. I started Harper Tech 30 years ago with $15,000 in savings and an idea, built it from nothing while raising my son alone. And yes, I did it while working as a gardener on weekends because I genuinely love the work. There's something honest about it, something real that you can't find in boardrooms and stock portfolios. Richard King had gone absolutely white. I saw his throat working, trying to swallow. Next to him, Patricia's mouth had fallen open in a way that would have been comical if this weren't so serious. Brandon was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger wearing his father's face. But I wasn't done. Not nearly. The ballroom remained frozen in that perfect moment of collective shock. 400 wealthy, influential people, realizing they just witnessed one of their own publicly humiliate a man worth more than most of them combined. I advanced to the next slide on the screen. "Now, here's where things get really interesting," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "Richard, you might want to pay attention to this part." Richard King looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His face had gone from white to an unhealthy gray, and I could see a vein pulsing in his temple. The screen now showed a corporate structure chart, clean, professional, damming through various investment vehicles, completely legal, all properly documented. I own 35% of King Industries. I let that land for a beat. I bought in about 8 years ago when the company was doing well. Good fundamentals, solid management. It seemed like a smart diversification of my portfolio. Richard made a strangled sound. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Of course, things have changed since then. King Industries has hit some rough patches lately. $47 million in debt. Wasn't it, Richard? 3 major contracts lost in the past 18 months. The company's been bleeding money, and you've been desperately searching for investors or a white knight to save you. I advanced the slide again, showing King Industries' financial statements, public record, but compiled and presented in a way that made the disaster crystal clear. The irony. Richard, is that you've been looking for a savior while simultaneously allowing your daughter to publicly humiliate your largest shareholder. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. That's what we in business call a strategic error. Jessica had gone from flush to pale, her champagne glass dangling forgotten in her hand. This isn't you can't be. I can be, and I am, I said pleasantly. 35% ownership, which means, Richard, that I have significant influence over your company's future. I could, for instance, call an emergency board meeting, force a vote on leadership, demand an audit, or, and this is my personal favorite option, I could simply sell my shares to one of your competitors. I've had offers. Richard tried to stand, but his legs seemed to give out. He collapsed back into his chair, one hand pressed to his chest. Patricia reached for him, her face a mask of panic. Richard, someone get water. He needs to learn that treating people with basic human decency isn't optional, I said, cutting through her hysteria. It's fundamental, but that's a lesson for later. I turned to face Brandon, who sat frozen at the head table. My son looked like he'd been struck by lightning, eyes wide, face slack with shock, his whole world visibly crumbling around him. Brandon, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. Come here, please. He stood mechanically, moving like a puppet with cut strings, walked across the dance floor to stand in front of me, up close. I could see his eyes were wet with tears. He was too proud or too shocked to let fall. This moment, right here. This is what happens when you choose status over integrity. When you let people you claim to love be degraded because you're too afraid to defend them. When you trade everything real for something hollow. Dad, I didn't know. His voice cracked. You knew I was your father. I interrupted. You knew I raised you alone. You knew I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. You knew all of that. And you sat there while your wife publicly humiliated me in front of 400 people. You knew. Brandon. You just didn't care enough to act on it. A tear finally escaped, rolling down his cheek. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you are. Sorry. You were wrong about who had the power in this room. Sorry you bet on the wrong horse. I stepped back, creating physical distance between us. But mostly, I think you're sorry you're about to face the consequences of your choices. I turned back to the crowd, many of whom looked like they were watching a car crash, horrified but unable to look away. Richard King. As of Monday morning, I'll be exercising my rights as a major shareholder to call an emergency board meeting. We'll be discussing your position as COO, among other things. I suggest you have your lawyer present. Richard was slumped in his chair now, Patricia frantically trying to revive him with water and smelling salts someone had produced. He looked defeated, diminished, a far cry from the arrogant man who'd sneered at my bonsai trees and called my home humble. Patricia, I addressed her directly. You said some people don't understand what class means. You're right. But I don't think you understand that class isn't about money or designer clothes or who you know. It's about character. It's about treating everyone from the CEO to the gardener with basic human respect. Something you and your daughter never learned. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish, no sound emerging. Finally, I turned to Jessica. She was shaking now, the microphone still clutched in her hand, her perfect wedding collapsing around her like a house of cards. Jessica, I want you to understand something very clearly. You married my son, thinking you were marrying up, marrying into security. But Brandon's position at King Industries, I paused meaningfully. Well, that's tied to his new father-in-law's continued employment there, isn't it? And you're used to living on your parents' money, not your husband's income. So, when I finish restructuring King Industries to actually be profitable again, when I remove the nepotism and the waste, where does that leave you? Her voice came out in a whisper. Please, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything except exercising my legal rights as a shareholder and protecting my investment. Everything else, those are just the natural consequences of your choices. She dropped to her knees, actually dropped her expensive dress, pooling around her on the polished floor. Mr. Harper, I'm begging you. I didn't know. We didn't know who you were. That's the problem. Jessica, you didn't know, and you didn't care to know. You saw an old man in modest clothes and decided he was beneath you, beneath contempt, worthy only of public humiliation. I looked down at her, feeling nothing but a cold satisfaction. But here's the thing about making assumptions. Sometimes they destroy you. From across the room, Patricia King's voice rang out high and desperate. Wait, Mr. Harper, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out. The wedding was stressful. Emotions were high. The wedding was revealing. I corrected. It showed me exactly what my son values, what your family represents, and what kind of people you all are when you think you're among friends who agree with your cruelty. I walked toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the silent ballroom. 400 people watched me go, their faces a mix of shock, judgment, and in some cases barely concealed satisfaction at seeing the mighty fallen. At the door, I turned back one last time. Brandon, you have my number. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about respect, about family, about what actually matters in life, call me. But not before I raised you to be better than this. If there's any part of that boy left inside you, prove it. Then I walked out into the warm Texas evening, leaving behind a wedding reception that would be talked about in Austin society circles for years to come. Behind me, I heard the eruption, voices raised, Jessica sobbing, Patricia shrieking at the wedding planner, Richard being helped out of his chair by concerned guests. The beautiful, expensive, carefully orchestrated disaster was complete. I got in my modest car, paid for in cash, no loans, because I'd never needed to impress anyone, and drove home to my small house on Willow Creek Drive. In my garden, my bonsai trees waited unchanged by the drama. The 18-year-old maple still had its perfect branches, still demonstrated that true value comes from patience and careful cultivation, not from flash and spectacle. I sat among them as the sun set, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. My son had made his choice. Now he would learn to live with it. And me. I'd finally shown the truth about who I was and what I'd built. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be diminished by people who underestimate you. Sometimes justice is just revealing the truth and letting the consequences unfold naturally. I picked up my phone and sent a text to David Turner. Monday morning. Prepare the paperwork for the board meeting. It's time to clean house. His response came seconds later, already drafting it. That was quite a show. I smiled to myself. The show had only just begun. The fallout from the wedding was immediate and spectacular. By Sunday morning, my phone was ringing non-stop. I ignored most of the calls. Reporters, curious business associates, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly remembering we were friends. Word had spread fast through Austin's social circles. 400 witnesses to a public humiliation and subsequent revelation tend to talk. I spent Sunday in my garden, pruning my bonsai trees with the same methodical care I always had. The 18-year-old maple needed some attention. A few branches were growing too aggressively, threatening the overall balance. I shaped them carefully, taking my time. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. A text from Brandon. "Dad, please. We need to talk." I set the phone face down and returned to my work. He could wait. He'd made me wait months while he chose his new family over me. A few days wouldn't kill him. Monday morning arrived with Texas sunshine in the promise of change. I dressed in one of my actual business suits, the kind I wore for board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. Not the modest Dillard suit from the wedding, but a custom-tailored piece that cost more than Brandon's monthly salary. David met me at my house at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying a leather briefcase thick with documents. "The King's attorneys have been calling non-stop," he said as we sat at my kitchen table. "They want to negotiate. I'm sure they do. Richard King himself called me at 6 this morning. He sounded desperate. Offered $5 million if you'll agree not to interfere with King Industries." I sipped my coffee, considering $5 million. That's interesting. It's also insulting. Your 35% stake is worth significantly more than that, especially if the company can be turned around properly. What did you tell him? That I'd relay the offer to you, which I just did. David smiled slightly. I also mentioned that you might be open to a meeting. Might be. I thought you'd want to see them squirm in person. Smart man. That's why I kept him on retainer. 2 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon, Richard King showed up at my door with 2 attorneys in tow. No Patricia this time. No Jessica. Just Richard. Looking like he'd aged 10 years in less than a week. His expensive suit hung a little looser, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of money could hide. I let them wait on my modest porch for a full minute before opening the door. "Mr. King, gentlemen, come in." We sat in my living room, my bonsai collection surrounding us like silent witnesses. I noticed Richard's eyes kept darting to the trees, probably remembering how his wife had mocked them. "Mr. Harper," Richard began, his voice tight with forced civility. "I think we got off on the wrong foot, did we? I thought we got off exactly where your family wanted with me, knowing my place. The problem was, you misunderstood what my place actually was." One of the attorneys, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, jumped in. "Mr. Harper, my client is prepared to offer you $5 million for a non-interference agreement regarding King Industries. You maintain your shares, but you agree not to exercise voting rights or influence company decisions." Non-inference? I let the word hang in the air. You want to pay me to stay silent and powerless like I was at the wedding reception, sitting in the back by the kitchen being told to leave by your client's daughter. Richard flinched. Jessica was emotional. The wedding stress. The wedding stress that made her call me worthless in front of 400 people. The stress that made your wife suggest I don't understand class. That stress. I leaned forward slightly. "No. Richard, this wasn't stress. This was who your family really is when they think they're among friends who will agree with their cruelty. Please." The word came out strangled. King Industries has been in my family for 3 generations. It's my legacy. If you force changes, if you start dismantling— "I'm not dismantling anything," I interrupted calmly. "I'm fixing what you broke. Your mismanagement, your nepotism, your inability to adapt to market changes. That's what's killing King Industries, not me." The second attorney spoke up. Mr. Harper, perhaps we could discuss a buyout of your shares at fair market value. Fair market value of a failing company with $47 million in debt. That doesn't sound very appealing. I stood, signaling the meeting was over. Gentlemen, here's what's going to happen. Monday morning, there will be an emergency board meeting. I'll be there exercising my rights as the largest shareholder. We'll be discussing leadership changes, operational audits, and the removal of all family members who don't actually contribute value to the company. Richard stood too, his face wreathing. You can't just, I can, I will. And Richard. I walked to the door, opened it. This isn't about money. It never was. This is about respect. Something you might want to explain to your daughter before she loses everything else. They left, and I watched their expensive car pull away from my modest street. The satisfaction I felt wasn't the warm kind. It was cold, sharp, necessary. The next day, Brandon showed up. I was watering my garden when I heard his car in the driveway. He got out slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he'd lost weight in just a few days. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, can we talk?" I set down the watering can. "Talk? I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Jess manipulated me. She made me think." "Stop." I held up a hand. "You did know. Brandon. You knew she was cruel to me at that first dinner. You knew she sent you texts calling me pathetic. You knew, and you said nothing. You chose nothing. I was trying to build a life. You were trying to buy acceptance into a world that will never truly accept you. Because people like the Kings don't respect climbers. Brandon. They tolerate them when it's useful and discard them when it's not." He sank onto my porch steps, his head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do? I just got married. I have a wife. You have a wife who married you thinking you were connected to money and power through her father. What do you think happens to that marriage when her father loses his position? When you lose the job you only got through nepotism?" I sat down next to him, keeping distance between us. "You made choices. Son, now you live with him. Can't you just forgive me? Forget this happened. I can forgive you eventually. Maybe. But forget?" I shook my head. "You showed me who you've become. That's not something I can unsee." He left 20 minutes later, broken and lost. I watched him go and felt something twist in my chest. Not regret, but sadness. Sadness for the boy he'd been, the man I'd hoped he'd become. 2 days after that, I had an encounter I actually hadn't anticipated. I was getting coffee at Mozart's, my usual spot, the place where David and I had met to plan all of this. I was sitting outside enjoying the morning when Jessica appeared. She'd changed her approach completely. Gone was the arrogant, cruel woman from the wedding. This Jessica wore simple clothes, minimal makeup, a practiced expression of contrition. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, approaching my table like someone approaching a wild animal. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but please, just hear me out." I gestured to the empty chair. Might as well see what strategy she'd chosen. She sat, folding her hands carefully on the table. "I was horrible to you. Unspeakably horrible. I said things, did things that I can never take back. And I understand if you can never forgive me. Do you understand why you said those things?" I asked, genuinely curious. She blinked, thrown by the question. I was raised in a certain environment with certain values. I thought what mattered was image, status, the right connections. And now I'm realizing that those things disappear the moment you can't maintain them. Her voice wavered. My parents are facing financial ruin. Brandon might lose his job. Our marriage is... She caught herself. Everything's falling apart. And you're here because you want me to stop the board meeting. I'm here because I'm sorry. She looked directly at me, and for the first time I saw something genuine in her eyes. Fear, maybe regret. I treated you like you were nothing, like you didn't matter, and you turned out to be everything. I misjudged you completely. You didn't misjudge me. Jessica, you never judged me at all. You looked at my clothes and my job and decided you knew everything about me. That's not misjudgment. That's prejudice. She nodded, tears starting to form. I know, and I'm trying to be better, to learn from this. I studied her for a long moment. Are you learning because you're genuinely sorry, or because you're afraid of the consequences? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know anymore. At least that was honest. The board meeting is happening, I said firmly. Your father needs to go. The company needs real leadership, not legacy appointments. But Jessica, that doesn't have to destroy your family. Richard is smart, capable. He just stopped being held accountable. He'll find other work. Your mother will adapt. And you? I stood to leave. You'll figure out if Brandon is enough for you when he doesn't come with connections and money. I left her sitting there, tears streaming down her face. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. That same evening, my attorney called Allie. I need to tell you something. The Kings have hired Marcus Whitmore. I knew that name. Whitmore was one of Austin's most aggressive attorneys, the kind who didn't win cases through legal brilliance, but through finding dirt and applying pressure. What's their play? They filed a lawsuit claiming you engaged in emotional manipulation and breach of fiduciary duty by not disclosing your stake in King Industries to Brandon before the wedding. It's ridiculous. But they're trying to create leverage. Exactly. They want to drag you through a public legal battle, make you look bad, pressure you into settling. I smiled into the phone. David, do you remember what I told you when we started working together 12 years ago? You said your life was an open book, that anyone could look as deep as they wanted and find nothing but honest work and clean living. Exactly. Let them dig. Let Marcus Whitmore spend his clients' money trying to find skeletons in a closet that doesn't exist. While they're wasting time and resources on a nonsense lawsuit, we'll move forward with the board meeting. You're not worried. After 30 years of building a company from nothing, watching every step, every decision, every relationship. No. David, I'm not worried at all. I hung up and sat in my garden as the sun set, my bonsai trees casting long shadows across the patio. The Kings were fighting back. Good. A victory without resistance isn't really a victory. It's just inevitability. Let them fight. Let them hire expensive lawyers and dig for dirt. Let them try every desperate move they could think of, because I'd built my life on solid ground while they'd built theirs on sand and status. And when the tide came in, only one of us would still be standing. The lawsuit hit the news the following week. Local tech mogul accused of manipulation in family dispute. Read the Austin Business Journal headline. The story painted me as a vindictive father who'd hidden his wealth to entrap his son and new in-laws. Marcus Whitmore, the King's attorney, gave a statement that was pure theater. Mr. Harper engaged in a calculated campaign of deception, deliberately concealing his financial status and corporate holdings to manufacture a scenario where he could publicly humiliate and destroy the King family. This is not justice. This is revenge. I read it over breakfast and laughed. The man had a gift for drama. I'd give him that. David called within the hour. Have you seen the statement? Just read it. It's creative fiction. It's also dangerous. They're trying to turn public opinion against you before the board meeting. Make you look like the villain. Let them try. How's our countersuit coming? Filed this morning. Defamation and slander for Jessica's statements at the wedding. We have 400 witnesses and multiple video recordings. Several guests were filming when she grabbed the microphone. Good. When's the court date for their suit? 2 weeks from today. Judge Morrison is presiding. She's sharp. Doesn't suffer nonsense. The board meeting for King Industries was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing every detail of the company's operations with Gerald Martinez, my CEO. He'd compiled a comprehensive analysis of what was wrong and how to fix it. The core business is sound, Gerald explained. Spreadsheets covering my dining table. They make good products. But Richard's been using the company as a personal piggy bank. Excessive executive compensation. Hiring unqualified family members. Luxury expenses that should never have been approved. Can it be saved? Absolutely. Clean house. Bring in actual talent. Focus on the manufacturing contracts they've been neglecting. Within 2 years, King Industries could be profitable again. And Richard Gerald shrugged. He needs to go. He's the problem. But the company itself, worth saving. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed in my best suit, reviewed my notes one final time, and drove to King Industries headquarters in downtown Austin. The building was impressive. 12 stories of glass and steel, the kind of architectural statement that screamed, "We're successful." Even when the balance sheets told a different story. I'd been here before, years ago, when I had first invested. Back then, it had been thriving. The boardroom was on the top floor with panoramic views of Austin's skyline. When I walked in, the reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Tension filled the room like smoke. Richard sat at the head of the table, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. Patricia was there, too. In a seat she had no legal right to occupy, 11 other board members filled the remaining chairs, their faces showing various degrees of curiosity, concern, and calculation. "Mr. Harper," Richard said, his voice strained, but attempting warmth. "Thank you for joining us. My 35% stake means I'm not really joining you. Richard, I'm exercising my rights as your largest shareholder." I took the seat directly across from him. A power move, making him look at me the entire meeting. David sat beside me, his briefcase already open, documents ready. Gerald joined us via video conference, his face appearing on the large monitor at the end of the room. "Let's begin," I said, taking control immediately. First item, King Industries' financial status. David, if you would present the analysis. What followed was 2 hours of brutal truth. David laid out every mistake, every mismanaged contract, every example of nepotism and waste. The other board members, experienced business people who'd been silently watching the company decline, grew increasingly angry as the full picture emerged. "You're bleeding $47 million in debt." One board member, a woman named Catherine Ross, said directly to Richard, "How did you let this happen?" Richard tried to deflect. "The market has been challenging. The market has been fine." Gerald's voice came through the speakers. "Your competitors are thriving. This is a management problem, not a market problem. I move that we terminate Richard King's position as COO." I said formally, "Effective immediately." "You can't do that." Patricia stood up, her voice shrill. "This is his family's company. This is a corporation with shareholders and fiduciary responsibilities." David corrected calmly. Family legacy doesn't override financial reality. The vote was quick. 6 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 opposed. Richard himself, who had the dignity not to vote for his own termination, but couldn't bring himself to vote for it either. He sat there, face red, hands trembling. "You're destroying everything my grandfather built. Your grandfather built a company that served its community and made quality products." I said, not unkindly, "You turned it into a personal ATM. I'm not destroying anything. I'm trying to save what he actually built." The second item was harder but necessary. Removing all family members from payroll who didn't have actual job qualifications. Brandon's name came up. Brandon Harper, marketing coordinator. David read from the list. Hired 6 months ago, despite having only 2 years of relevant experience and no demonstrated results. Salary, $87,000 annually. I felt every eye in the room turn to me. They wanted to see if I'd protect my son, if family loyalty would override my principles. "Remove him," I said quietly. Same standard for everyone. Richard actually looked shocked. "You'd fire your own son? I'd remove someone who got a job through connections rather than merit. If Brandon wants to work here, he can reapply through proper channels and compete for a position he's actually qualified for." The vote passed. 6 positions eliminated, including Brandon's. Patricia burst into tears. Richard sat frozen, looking smaller somehow, diminished. "Final item," I said. "I'm proposing we bring in an interim CEO, someone with turnaround experience, to stabilize operations while we search for permanent leadership. I have someone in mind. If the board is interested." We discussed options for another hour. By the end, a clear path forward had emerged. New leadership, operational audit, refocus on core manufacturing strengths. As the meeting adjourned, Richard approached me, Patricia trailing behind him. "You've destroyed us," he said, voice hollow. "Taken everything. I've taken nothing that was yours by right." "Richard, I exercised my legal authority as a shareholder to protect my investment. If you'd run the company properly, none of this would have been necessary. Our daughter married your son," Patricia said, her makeup streaked with tears. "Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant something when you were using that marriage to solidify your social position and business connections. Now that the tables are turned, suddenly family matters." I picked up my briefcase. "You taught Jessica to judge people by their wealth and status. She learned that lesson well. Maybe now you can all learn a different one." I left them standing in that boardroom, their empire crumbling, their carefully constructed world of privilege falling apart. That evening, my phone rang. "Brandon, Dad, they fired me." "I know. I was at the meeting." Silence. "Then you voted to fire me. I voted to remove all unqualified family hires. You were one of several." "I can't believe." His voice broke. "How could you do this? How could you sit silent while your wife publicly humiliated me? We both made choices. Brandon, mine were about protecting the company and its employees. Yours were about protecting your comfort. Jess is furious. She's saying I ruined everything, that marrying me destroyed her family's business. And what do you say?" Long pause. "I don't know anymore. I don't know anything." "Then maybe it's time you figured it out. Without the safety net, without the connections, without the shortcuts. Figure out who you are when you have to build something yourself." I hung up, feeling that twist in my chest again. The sadness hadn't gone away. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo attached. I opened it. It was me. taken from across the street, standing at my front door. The message read, "We know where you live. We know your schedule. Back off, or things get complicated." I stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to David with a note. "The Kings are getting desperate. Document this for the defamation case." His response came immediately. "Already saved. This is witness intimidation. I'm reporting it to the police." "Do that." "But David, I'm not backing off. I didn't think you would." That night, I sat in my garden with my bonsai trees, the threatening photo still on my phone. A private investigator. Probably the Kings trying one last desperate play to scare me into retreat. They didn't understand yet. Couldn't understand. I'd spent 30 years building something real, something that couldn't be threatened away or bought off or intimidated. I'd faced down competitors, economic downturns, technological changes that destroyed bigger companies than mine. A threatening text from a desperate family wasn't going to shake me, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tired. Tired of the fighting, the legal maneuvering, the constant chess match. I'd wanted justice. Wanted my son and his new family to understand the consequences of their cruelty. I was getting that. But the cost, the distance from Brandon, the conflict, the ugliness of it all was heavier than I had expected. I touched the maple bonsai, my fingers gentle on branches I'd shaped for 18 years. Was it worth it? I asked the tree, knowing it couldn't answer. But maybe I already knew. Justice wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel necessary. And this was necessary, even if it hurt. The court date arrived 2 weeks after the threatening photo incident. Judge Morrison's courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less dramatic than the movies made such things seem. Just wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and the weight of legal process grinding forward. David and I sat on one side. Marcus Whitmore and his team occupied the other, with Richard and Patricia King seated behind them, looking diminished in their expensive clothes. Jessica wasn't there. Neither was Brandon. Judge Morrison was a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd seen every legal trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Mr. Whitmore, she said, reviewing the documents before her. Your clients are claiming Mr. Harper engaged in deliberate deception and emotional manipulation. I've reviewed your evidence. Would you like to present your case? What followed was 2 hours of Marcus Whitmore trying to paint me as a villain. He showed timeline charts, financial records, even character witnesses who testified that I'd always been secretive about my wealth. Mr. Harper deliberately concealed his true financial status. Whitmore argued, his voice full of theatrical indignation. He allowed the King family to believe he was a simple gardener, setting up a scenario where he could humiliate them publicly at their daughter's wedding. This wasn't justice. It was premeditated revenge. When it was David's turn, he stood calmly and presented a single piece of evidence. The video recording from the wedding. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A. This is footage from the wedding reception, filmed by multiple guests. I'll play the relevant section. The courtroom fell silent as Jessica's voice filled the room. That pathetic old man is ruining our elegant celebration. Just look at him. Old gardener in a cheap suit. Brandon, tell your father to leave. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. David continued. Mr. Harper never lied about being a gardener. He is a gardener. It's his hobby. He never claimed to be poor. He simply lived modestly because that's his preference. The King family made assumptions based on prejudice and classism, then publicly humiliated him when he didn't meet their aesthetic standards. He presented more evidence, screenshots of Jessica's texts about me. Patricia's condescending visit to my house, Brandon's request that I stay inconspicuous. The only manipulation here, David said quietly, was the King family's attempt to erase Mr. Harper's presence from his own son's life because they were embarrassed by his appearance. Judge Morrison reviewed everything in silence. Then she looked directly at Richard King. Mr. King, your family publicly humiliated this man at a wedding with 400 witnesses. You called him worthless, demanded he leave, mocked his profession. Now you're surprised that he used legal means to protect his business interests in your failing company. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Case dismissed. Judge Morrison said, "Furthermore, I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Harper's countersuit for defamation. The Kings will pay damages of $50,000 plus Mr. Harper's legal fees. This court does not look kindly on people who abuse others and then claim victimhood when consequences follow." The gavel came down with a sound like finality. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. David handled them expertly while I walked to my car, but I did hear one reporter's question to Richard. "Mr. King, do you regret your daughter's statements at the wedding?" I didn't wait to hear his answer. 3 weeks later, the bankruptcy proceedings for King Industries concluded. The company's assets were auctioned off piece by piece: patents, equipment, real estate, everything Richard's grandfather had built. I attended the auction, not to gloat, but because Harper was genuinely interested in some of the patents. They were good technology, just badly managed. When the auctioneer announced the industrial cybersecurity patents, the ones Richard had neglected for years, I signaled my bid through Gerald, who was representing Harper Tech officially. $12 million. The auctioneer announced, sold to Harper Tech Solutions. Across the room, Richard King sat like a statue, watching his family's legacy transferred to the man he'd treated as beneath his notice. His face was gray, empty. Patricia sat beside him, holding his hand, both of them looking 20 years older than they had at that disastrous dinner months ago. I felt no triumph in that moment, just a cold sense of completion. As I left, Richard caught up with me in the parking lot. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his voice. "Destroying everything." "I didn't destroy anything. Richard, you did that yourself through mismanagement and arrogance. I just declined to save you from the consequences. My grandfather built that company, and you dismantled it by using it as a personal bank account instead of a business. Your grandfather would be ashamed of what you turned it into." He flinched like I'd struck him. "You could have helped us. You could have invested, turned it around, saved it. But you chose revenge instead. I chose justice. I corrected. There's a difference. Justice is letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. Revenge would have been destroying you, even if you'd been kind to me." I started walking toward my car. "You and your family treated me like garbage because you judged me by my clothes and my modest house. That's on you, Richard, not me." A few days later, I saw the interview with Patricia in the Austin Chronicle. The headline read, "Former Society Queen Admits We Were Blinded by Pride." In the article, Patricia offered a carefully crafted apology, talking about learning lessons and understanding that true class wasn't about money. It was PR damage control, trying to salvage something from their social wreckage. I didn't comment. Didn't need to. The real culmination came in late summer when Brandon showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon. He'd lost weight, looked tired, but there was something different in his eyes, something harder, more real. "I got a job," he said without preamble. "Assistant manager at a small marketing firm. $43,000 a year, less than half what I was making before. That's good, I said. Honest work. Jessica filed for divorce. His voice cracked slightly. She said she couldn't be married to a failure, that I'd destroyed her family's business and her social standing, that everything that happened was my fault. I waited, letting him work through it. Was it my fault? Dad, all of this? I considered the question carefully. You made choices. Brandon, you chose to be ashamed of me instead of defending me. You chose status over integrity. Jessica made her choices too, and so did her parents. Everyone facing consequences now earned them, even me, especially you, because you knew better. I raised you to be better. He nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I lost everything. My wife, my job, my reputation. People in my industry know what happened, know that I was fired for nepotism, that my marriage fell apart, that my father-in-law's company went bankrupt partially because of my family connection. And what did you learn? He looked at me for a long time. That the people who love you for what you have will leave when you have nothing. That status and money aren't character. That I should have defended you. His voice dropped to a whisper. That I should have been the son you deserved. Not the son I thought would impress people who didn't matter. For the first time in months, I felt something soften in my chest. That's a start, I said quietly. The autumn months that followed were different. Not easier exactly, but clearer. Like fog lifting to reveal the actual landscape. Brandon started coming by every weekend, not to ask for anything, not to plead his case, just to help in the garden. The first Saturday, he showed up with work gloves and asked what needs doing. I handed him pruning shears and showed him how to shape the juniper bonsai. He was terrible at it initially, too aggressive, no patience, but he kept trying. You have to think 3 years ahead, I explained, guiding his hand to the right branch. See how this one will grow if you cut here? It'll throw the whole balance off. But if you cut here instead, it creates space for the tree to develop properly. He practiced for hours, sweat on his forehead, dirt under his fingernails, probably for the first time since he was a child. Watching him work, I remembered the boy who'd helped me plant tomatoes in our tiny backyard, the boy who'd been proud of his dad, who'd run to greet me after long shifts, who'd never cared what I wore or how much money I made. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under years of trying to be someone else. By mid-September, our Saturday sessions had become routine. We'd work in the garden for a few hours, then sit on the porch with iced tea, talking about everything except the past few months, the weather, the news, the bonsai, small things that slowly rebuilt something we'd lost. One Saturday in late September, the first cool day after a brutal Texas summer, Brandon and I sat finishing up work on the maple bonsai, when he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about learning from consequences." Yeah, Jessica loved the idea of me, not me. The King family loved what I could do for their business connections, not who I was. And I let them treat you, my actual father, who actually sacrificed for me, like you were worthless because I wanted to belong to their world. I waited. I don't know how to fix that. Don't know if I can. Can't fix the past, I said, trimming a tiny branch with precise care. Can only build the future differently. How do I do that? I set down my tools and looked at him directly. You work. You build something real, not borrowed. You treat people with respect, regardless of what they have, and you prove through actions, not words that you've learned. He nodded, absorbing that. The next week, I made a decision, called Gerald, and had him prepare an offer. When Brandon arrived that Saturday, I handed him an envelope. "What's this job offer?" "Entry-level analyst position at Harper Tech, $52,000 a year. You'll start at the bottom. Work regular hours. Report to a manager who won't care that you're my son. If you do well, you advance on merit. If you don't, you're fired. Same as anyone else." His hands shook as he opened it. "Dad, I don't deserve—" "You don't?" I agreed, but everyone deserves a chance to earn their way back. This isn't forgiveness. Brandon, it's opportunity. What you do with it determines everything. He started the following Monday. I got weekly reports from his supervisor, not because I asked for them, but because I was still the company owner. The reports were adequate. Brandon showed up on time, did his work, asked questions when he didn't understand something. Nothing spectacular, but honest effort. That was enough for now. In mid-October, news broke that Jessica had filed for bankruptcy. Her Instagram influencer career had imploded after sponsors discovered she'd been using fake engagement and misleading advertising. The account was deleted. Her carefully constructed online empire collapsed. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just a distant sense that actions had consequences. And she was learning that the hard way. Richard had found work as a consultant for a small manufacturing firm, $70,000 a year, a dramatic fall from his previous position, but honest work. Patricia had taken a job at a local charity, actually doing real work for the first time in decades. The Kings had learned the same lesson Brandon was learning, that you can't buy respect, and status without substance is just an expensive illusion. On the last Saturday in October, as Texas finally cooled into something resembling autumn, Brendan and I worked side by side in my garden. The maple bonsai, my 18-year-old masterpiece, needed its annual shaping. "See this tree," I said, touching the delicate branches. 18 years I've been growing this. Started from a seed. Every branch you see, I shaped. Every curve, every angle, years of patient work. Brandon studied it. Really looked. It's beautiful. Know what makes it beautiful. Not forcing it. Not trying to make it into something it's not. Just patient attention. Careful guidance. Letting its essential nature emerge. I turned to face him. "That's what I tried to do with you. But somewhere along the way, you decided you needed to be something else. Something more impressive. I wanted to be successful. You wanted to be impressive. There's a difference. Success is building something real. Impressive is performing for an audience who doesn't actually care about you." He nodded, understanding, finally settling in his eyes. "Your ex-wife loved impressive. I love real." I handed him the pruning shears. "You're learning to be real again. That's worth more than any amount of money or status." For the first time in almost a year, we had dinner together at my kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just pot roast and vegetables. The kind of simple meal we used to share every Sunday. "Dad," Brandon said halfway through, "I know I can't undo what I did. Can't take back staying silent at the wedding. Can't erase months of being ashamed of you. But I want you to know, I see it now. I see what matters." "What's that?" "This." He gestured at the modest kitchen, the simple meal, the quiet evening, not the big house or the expensive wedding or the impressive job title, just being someone worth respecting, building something real, working with your hands and being proud of it. I looked at my son, really looked, and saw genuine change, not the sudden transformation of a movie, but the slow growth of someone actually learning. "You lost everything to understand what matters," I said. That's the most expensive lesson there is. Most expensive lesson I've ever learned." He agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "But maybe it's the most important one, too." We finished dinner in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. Later, as the sun set over Austin, Brandon and I sat on my porch with the bonsai trees surrounding us. The maple's branches caught the golden light. 18 years of patient work, creating something genuinely beautiful. You can't buy dignity with money. "Son," I said, watching the sunset, "can't purchase respect with status. These things grow slowly, like these trees. They require patience, care, time. They require being genuine, treating people with honor regardless of what they have." Brandon nodded, understanding in a way he never had before. For the first time in almost a year, I felt something like peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had been broken for that, but a sense that justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and maybe, just maybe, something real could be rebuilt from the ruins. Brandon was working honestly, facing his consequences, slowly becoming the man I'd hoped to raise. The kings had fallen from their pedestal of arrogance and learned that cruelty has a price. Jessica had discovered that relationships built on status collapse when status disappears. And me, I'd proven that a man's worth isn't measured by his clothes or his modest house, but by his character, his work, and his refusal to be diminished by people who mistake wealth for value. Justice restored, not through revenge, but through truth, not through cruelty, but through consequences. The maple bonsai swayed gently in the evening breeze, its perfect branches a testament to patience, vision, and the understanding that true value takes time to cultivate. I looked at my son working to earn back what he'd thrown away and smiled. Some lessons cost everything, but if you survive them, if you actually learn, they're worth every penny. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching. On the top. I'm not